Good afternoon, everyone. At least here, where I'm joining you from in Boston today. So I am coming to you from the East Coast of the United States today, just outside of Boston, to talk about AI-assisted exploration. So this is a brand new topic for me. AI Assist has been, of course, integrated with MAXQDA for quite a while. But this is kind of the first official webinar I put together that is specifically about this topic. So um, again, this is new content today, so any feedback that you might have would be greatly appreciated. My name is Joel Drevlow. I'm going to be your trainer for today. I work with um, MAXQDA. I run my own consultancy as well. So I work with IQDAS Consulting is the business that I run, but I'm also a MAXQDA cooperation partner and a certified trainer. So I will be guiding you through this webinar today, trying to talk to you a little bit about some of the AI assist features. We're going to be grounding them specifically sort of in the idea of data exploration. There's a lot of different ways that we can approach AI assist. They're very versatile in terms of how you can use them in your work. But today we're going to kind of look at it specifically from the angle of exploring a data set, whether that is some data that was given to you. So I work as a consultant. This happens for me quite a bit where I am provided with data and I'm asked to provide some analysis on that data. And so it's to my best interest to do that as expedient as possible, as quickly as possible. And so the AI assist features come in quite handy there in terms of getting started with the project. But I think there's a lot of ways that you can integrate this, regardless of sort of the style of work that you do, whether you're in academia and business, working for nonprofits or governmental organizations. So we'll take a look at some of these today and see if we can find some ways to help you out in some of the work that you're doing. So just real quickly about my background and experience. Prior to starting my own consultancy, I worked with a university, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I worked at the Division of Extension there, which is an outreach organization that does educational programming across the state. Maybe we have some Badgers in the audience today, but the work there was to evaluate our programming. So I actually did most of my early work with MAXQDA, where I was sort of trained on it and did most of my early work with program evaluation. So we were working with a lot of survey data. We were working with a lot of sort of interviews with clients that we worked with or local governments or all kinds of different entities that we sort of touched through our work. And so we used MAXQDA to do a lot of that program evaluation. In the course of that, we did a lot of teamwork as well. So that's kind of an area of my expertise is collaborative analysis or team-based analysis. And then another aspect of the role was just teaching people how to use the software. So it was a nice, easy transition from working at UW into my own consultancy now. Again, I'm based out of the Boston area. So if you're somewhere on the East Coast, maybe we're not too far apart. If you want to get in touch with me after today's session, if you saw any of the resources that you'd like to get a hold of, if you'd like to schedule just a quick consultation chat with me, if you have some data you'd like to look at together, get some feedback or sort of run through setting up a MAXQDA project, I'm happy to do that. You can find me at joel.drevlow at IQDAS or IQDAS.com. That's my business email address. Great place to reach me. Or you can check out my website at IQDAS.com. So with that, let's go ahead and get into today's topics. I do have a poll that I prepared today. Let's see if I can figure out. We've just switched over. This is my first time using Zoom for this instead of GoToWebinar. So I'm trying to find everything here at polls and quizzes. I do have a poll here. I'm going to go ahead and launch this. So I just have a few questions that I'd like you to answer if you don't mind. Just some basic things just to get a sense of people's usage of the AI assist, if you're actually using it, how frequently you use it in your work or in your study, which functions do you use most, and then what type of data do you work with, as well as do you collect your own data or do you use prepared data sets? So are you actually out in the field collecting data, or are you working as sort of an analyst where somebody else maybe is collecting data, maybe another team is doing that? I think this is just kind of a interesting new topic, and so I'm just trying to get a sense of where people are at before we jump into things. So I'll leave that open, and then I'm going to go through a little bit about today's session, just some of the big questions, some of the things that are good to be thinking about today as we get into this process to sort of ground the learning that we have for today. The first question: how do you begin to process new data? Take a little bit of time to think about that. Maybe this is not something that you think about. You just get the data and you do your work. But sometimes having the sort of push to really think explicitly about that process and how you do it can be helpful to think of new ways to do this that either make the process more efficient for you so you can process data just more expediently, and so you can sort of get products generated more rapidly. Or if you maybe struggle at certain points, sort of interrogating a few of those areas where we can sort of improve the process for you a little bit. The second question here is what can you do with AI Assist to process new data? So obviously there are traditional methods that we've all had that we've read about in different methodologies and in different approaches to qualitative data analysis. But AI Assist has really thrown probably a wrench in a lot of those, or is at least a new wrinkle to adapt to in terms of how we work with data, how we process data. And it's not, I don't see it yet as this, magic bullet to do all this work. There is still a lot of manual work that needs to be done by you, the researcher. But I do think that there's some good things that can be done here to, again, assist us if we think of it in that context as an assistant rather than something doing all the work. So those are the big questions to look at today. In terms of sort of our session outline or our goals for this webinar today, I'm going to give you first an overview of the available AI Assist functions. There was a new one that was released maybe a week or so ago, the explain function. So we'll look at that today. You'll get a chance to see that. But I'm going to try and ground some of this in more sort of tangible places. We're going to look at, I put together a nice concept map that will show you some of the different ways that we can conceptualize AI Assist, where it's happening, sort of where you access it in the software, sort of what the purpose is, and sort of how these different functions in the software connect to different goals that we might have and different locations in the software. So we'll map all that out and sort of give you an idea of things. I'm hoping by seeing that you'll get a better sense of how you can use it. I don't want to give you such a specific example or sort of walkthrough that it maybe is not applicable for you. So I'm going to try and be broad with this today. And so we're going to look at that first, and then I'm going to take you through as much of a demonstration as I can. This is I think it was billed as an hour 15, but it is actually a little bit shorter than that today in terms of the content that I have planned and the time that I have available today. So we'll get through as many of these features as we can, and of course, hold time for questions at the end today. So we'll look at the summarized features, and we'll look at them in the different contexts between documents, selections, coded segments, and the summary grid. So we'll look at the specific areas there. We'll talk about this sort of as a unit of analysis and sort of conceptualizing that for you about how these different functions work in different places with different documents. And also, I asked earlier about what kind of data do you use. That's going to be a big part of this as well. Some data types are more amenable to some of these functions than others. We'll look at the paraphrase function as well, the AI Assist paraphrase. We'll look at the suggest functions to get new codes and subcodes. And then we'll look at the brand new function for explain. I do also want to hold plenty of time today at the end for questions that you may have about anything that you see today. So let's go ahead and end this poll. I think we've got pretty good responses here. Interesting. How frequently do you use AI Assist? So not at all. So we've got a good crowd today for learning about AI Assist. That's good. Makes my job a little easier. Which AI Assist functions do you use most? Summarize. That probably makes sense. They're the most there's more options to do summaries in MAXQDA, and I think that was sort of how it was designed initially, so that makes sense. What type of data? Transcript. So most of us are working with longer form data, so interviews, focus group transcripts, okay? That's good to know. Again, we'll talk a little bit about this, but different data, whether it's long form or short data, is gonna work a little bit differently in terms of how you integrate these functions. And do you collect your own data? I collect my data. Wow, most of us are collecting our own data. That's great. Cool, very cool. So in terms of exploring a data set, then, if you're collecting your own data, obviously you have a pretty good familiarity with data, or at least you should. If you're doing the interviews, if you're making the interview scripts and those kinds of things. If you're working in a context sort of like I do as a consultant, where you're getting data and you don't really have much control over what questions were asked, how they were asked, how they were recorded, some of these pieces are a little bit more applicable. But I think that there will still be a good use case in here so far. And I do have making the PowerPoint a little bit bigger. I'm not really going to be using the slides any further from here. This is the last that I'm going to use this. Most of the demonstration is going to happen right in MAXQDA, but I can zoom in a little bit on these if that helps. Okay. Again, I do have the webinar chat open, so if you want to drag my outline over to the other screen, if you do want to ask questions or give any feedback in the chat, you can go ahead and do that as well. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is actually give you an overview here. And so I have got, let's see, a sort of concept map that I'm going to present here. Okay, and just some feedback. Is everybody able to see that all right? Let me know if not, if there's no frantic notes in the chat. I'll assume that everyone can see that okay. So I've mapped this out a little bit today. I was thinking about this in the lead up to the webinar about how we can sort of conceptualize getting to use these tools and how we can sort of integrate them into our workflow. So I made this little concept map to kind of demonstrate some of these things, and I broke this into roughly sort of 3 categories or 3 areas, topics. Locations, purpose, and function. And so I see these sort of interacting in terms of how we can integrate these tools. And so I think we'll start first with this idea of purpose. So why would we use these AI assist tools? So what would be the point of actually incorporating them into our workflow? And so, and again, this is just for me. This is not a definitive list of any of this. This is just sort of how I was conceptualizing this. And so I looked at it as sort of at these sort of 4 broad purposes or 4 broad sort of goals to the AI assist. And the first is reduce. Reduce, what I mean by that is reducing the amount of data that you're processing. So rather than working with 10 pages of a document, you're working with maybe 1 or 2. So the idea is to make sort of less work for yourself in terms of processing data. That doesn't mean that you don't need to read all 10 pages of an interview transcript or something like that. What it means is, as you're in the early stages of exploring this, you can reduce some of that, and so you can process more data, and so you can kind of get into the flow of doing this work. The second piece here, synthesize. Synthesize is going to come at a much different stage. Synthesize implies that we have some analysis done across maybe several documents, and we're trying to take that analysis that has been established and we're trying to sort of bring it together into some kind of cohesive statement or commentary on what we've seen. And so this is going to come in MAXQDA. This is going to come through your coded segments, right? You need to have some coding work done in order to be able to use the AI Assist summary features to synthesize this work. Familiarize is going to be coming at the earlier stages, right? So this is the idea of getting to know your data, right? If speaking from my own context as a consultant, this is important to me because I didn't collect this data usually. I'm working with someone else's data, and so I need to get familiar with it so that I can understand it and so that I can begin to add some interpretation, some structure to this. And so, I mean, if you read specific methodologies on this, this is usually consistently a specific step in the process, right, to familiarize yourself with the data. The next piece that I sort of came up with today is this concept of code conceive or code conception, this idea of how do we build a code system. And I think what we'll look at today, one of the features that I see that is most useful with the AI Assist is the idea of not necessarily completely conceptualizing a code system using Chat-GPT, but rather supplementing your own conception of the code system with ChatGPT. And so one of the really tricky parts of creating a code system is the naming of a code. Creating a name for a code that is precise enough to capture some type of meaning or interpretation, but broad enough or vague enough to be able to apply across different documents, across a lot of data. And that's a hard sort of sweet spot to find. And so I think what I've found in my experimentation is that the suggest features, the suggest subcodes, and the suggest codes option really give you some nice ideas. It's not going to create anything that you probably didn't already think of as a researcher, but it will give you really nice, clean names, and it will give you a system that I think is maybe a little bit more functional. Not that you can get there on your own, but it might, again, assist you, reduces some of the work there. The next piece here, so we've talked about the purpose. So why do we use AI Assist? What's the goals? We're not just doing it because it's fun to play with. I mean, ChatGPT is really fun to play with, but we do have a specific purpose in mind here. The next piece here is going to be let's take a look at the functions. And so we have what I see in with the AI Assist. We have sort of four main functions: summarize, suggest, paraphrase, and explain. Explain is a new one, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the idea is to summarize, and we can summarize data in a number of different places and in a number of different ways. We'll look at some of that. You'll see that more clearly when I open up the locations tab. Suggest is going to be giving you ideas. You can think of this as sort of like a thought partner where ChatGPT gives you maybe some insight that you would not have come to on your own, or maybe it would have taken you a little bit longer to come to if you're working as an individual researcher. The idea of paraphrasing is, I think in some ways is similar to summarizing, right? We are taking a selection of data and we are reducing it. But what's different is the workflow. So paraphrasing in MAXQDA allows you some different workflows where you can actually take these paraphrases and you can turn these paraphrases into codes. So it gives you more of a systematic process, and it allows you to integrate this at an earlier stage than if you had coded segments to summarize. The last idea here is this idea of explain. And so the explain function allows you to grab a portion of text. I think the idea here is probably something coming from literature, if you're doing literature reviews or something like that. But it could also be just sort of basic concepts that are mentioned, and it gives you definitions. I think this can be helpful. I think we need to be careful with this because we need to know sometimes where we explain these things from, why we explain things the way that we do. And so I think it can be a useful tool. It's not something that I would probably integrate directly into any kind of publication or something that's going to be for audiences, broader audiences than yourself. So we've gone through purpose, we've gone through function. If we take a look at locations, we'll get a sense of where the AI Assist can happen. And so we can work with AI Assist in our document system. There's specific functions. The result will be stored in our document memo, right, as a document summary, which you'll see in the demonstration. We can work in our code system, where they will typically be stored in our code memos, or they'll be just new codes if we use the suggest codes option. We can work with them in our document browser. And from our poll, quite a few of you are working with longer form data, transcriptions, maybe literature, things like that. And so you'll be doing some work there. And then the last option is in your summary grid. And so this may or may not be an aspect of your data analysis. Some people do not use the summary grid. It's just not a technique that they apply in their analysis. But I think that it does offer some nice functionality. And again, the point to make here is this idea of unit of analysis. Each location and each implementation of the AI Assist is going to cast a broader or a narrower view, right? I can take a whole bunch of data. I can take a whole bunch of data from a single document, a whole bunch of data from many documents. I can take a very specific piece of data from a single document. I can take data from several pieces of data from a single document. So there's a lot of different combinations that I can employ here to sort of get closer to my ultimate goal, right? Which is understanding what it is I'm seeing. So now that we've got an idea of all of these three broad categories, how are they related? So if we take a look at we're going to go by the specific functions because the functions are going to unite the two, right? The functions are going to pull together the purpose and the locations of where we integrate those functions. So let's take a look at these. The first one, let's start with summarize. That was the most, according to our polls, the one that's most used, and I think probably is because there's just the most options to use it in the software. So let's take a look at summarize. You can see when I summarize, I am, as far as my goals that I'm able to accomplish, I'm able to reduce data, I'm able to synthesize data, and I'm able to familiarize myself with data. Now, these particular functions, in terms of their location, they correspond to pretty much every location in MAXQDA. So I can summarize from my document system, my code system, my document browser, and my summary grid. So there's a lot of places where I can integrate this summary tool. The difference, again, is how much you summarize. So I can summarize a document in my document system, a whole document, a whole text. I can summarize coded segments across many documents using my code system. I can summarize a very specific selection of text using my document browser, and I can summarize coded segments as they are grouped by individual documents in my summary grid. So I might have coded for a concept 3 or 4 times in someone's interview. Now I'm able to look at all 3 of those instances, and I can create a summary of all 3 of those references to the topic, the category, the code, the theme, whatever it is according to your method or approach. Again, when we look at sort of the function of this to reduce, I'm summarizing a document where I had 10 pages, now I have a paragraph, right? In the synthesis, I had many coded segments. I've now summarized them into some bullet points into a paragraph of text. Familiarize, I'm able to read summarized data. This does not mean that you don't read the whole interview transcript, but it means that you either at the beginning or the end or at some point in the process are able to read a summarized version of this, which hopefully will give you a different insight or a different viewpoint, or will give you some kind of perspective that maybe you would not have got reading such a detailed analysis. My thought process is that by reading the summary first, you give yourself a nice sort of grounding in this, and so that you can maybe prepare yourself to see things a little bit easier, right? Things that you maybe had not noticed. Instead of having to do so much sort of interpretation and sort of interpretation and just sort of familiarization in the same go, you're able to reduce a little bit of that, right? That's kind of the idea there. If we go into the next piece here, suggest, you'll see that suggest is going to be related in terms of our purposes. It's going to be related to this idea of code conceive. How do we create code? How do we conceive of our actual code system? How do we build it and then apply it to our data? In terms of where you can use this, you'll be able to use this in the document browser where you can suggest new codes. And so this is a more limited approach because it's taken from a selection of text. So you can't just do it for a whole document. It has to be for a defined selection of text. For the suggest subcodes option, this is going to happen in your code system, and these results will be stored in your code memo. So again, I'm going to show all this in the demonstration, so you'll see how to actually do the function. But to give you an idea of where the results are stored or where the function is accessed, right? It's accessed in our code system in this case. When we get into the idea of paraphrasing is going to help us to reduce our data, right? So I'm going to be able to take a longer portion of text, and I'm going to be able to reduce it to what I define as the important pieces. And there is analysis in that. Deciding what to include and what not to include, deciding what vocabulary to use, how your voice comes through. There is analysis in that. So it does reduce this as we paraphrase these selections. Again, with familiarizing, it requires you, by reading and paraphrasing a portion of text, it requires you to read and think about what you see. There is also a piece in here. I realize now as I'm thinking of this, we could actually connect this to Code Conceive as well because of the systematic process in MAXQDA where you can categorize paraphrases. So you can create a paraphrase of a section of text, and then you can actually categorize those paraphrases into codes. And so it allows you a very systematic step-by-step process where you can go from raw data to a code system or coded data. And our last piece here, explain. This is going to be connected to our idea of familiarizing ourselves with the data. We need to understand concepts. We need to understand terms. We need to understand those pieces in the data in order to be able to interpret, right? That's pretty important. And it's going to be located in our in-document memo. So this is going to be something that's going to be embedded in your actual document. So I hope seeing this gives you sort of a sense of what our goals are with these tools, right? It's not some kind of thing that's going to come in and solve all our problems for us and do all of our work, but it is going to add to it and sort of supplement and sort of make things easier for us. And then also, where do you access these things? So we have these specific functions, but where do you actually access them in the software? And so that's what we'll go through here in the demonstration that we're going to get started shortly. All right. So that was our tool. I created that with Lucidchart, by the way, if anybody's wondering. It's a really interesting program. I enjoyed putting that together. It's a nice mind mapping software if you're looking for something to do that with. So let me take a look here. So my project file back open. I do have a copy of this. If you would like a copy of this, I didn't have it uploaded to the webinar today, but feel free to reach out to me if you would find a copy of this helpful. Be happy to share that with you. Let's go ahead and jump into the demonstration. So I think the first thing that we're going to talk about here is we're going to go through the summarize functions. And so what we're going to use, we'll go ahead and use these interview transcripts. I'm going to go ahead and let's see, we'll work with one that doesn't have so many paraphrases. So we'll work with Tan's interview today. If you did want to follow along, I'm just going to be working from the example project, which you can find here. Example projects, English work-life balance. I'm going to turn this off, display coded segments, just to make that a little bit cleaner. All right. So the idea here is when we're talking about summarization, we want to think of what are our units of analysis as we get through this. And so there's a couple different places that you can find this. So first of all, let's see, if we open up Tan's interview here, you'll see I do have, anytime you see this icon, that's going to give you a clue that this AI assist is possible here. And so you can see that I already have a user-generated summary for this. So we've created one in our example project for this that sums up Tan's interview, that gives us sort of the highlights here. But if I wanted to create a summary of this, I could simply, I could do it right there in the memo. I could use this icon. This will allow me to create a summary, but I could also right-click on this document, and you'll see this option here, AI Assist Summarize Document. So this is going to be the whole document. Do note that if you're using the free version of the AI Assist, you're limited to 10 pages of text a day. So if you're summarizing really long documents, you're going to need to space it out, or you're going to need to pay for the premium version in order to be able to do that. I think I did one of these earlier today already, just to save us some time, some processing time. And of course, I can't remember. Was it Chris? No. It was this one. It was Salim. So I did one of these earlier this morning just to save some time in terms of generating that summary. Let me walk you through that though quick. If I walk through with Riley, just to show you the options that are available. So first of all, you can choose the length, shorter, standard, or longer. I went with just a standard today. You can also provide this in bullet points. If you prefer bullet points, if that's just easier for you to read, you can do that as well. And I've generated both, so you can see what they're like. If you are concerned with the privacy, or you want to read more about that, that's linked here. So our data sharing agreement, all that good stuff is there. If you need to check that out to get IRB or anything like that, you can find all that documentation linked right here every time you use this feature. So lots of options available for languages as well, if you're working in a language other than English. So let's go back to Salim's document memo. Remember, a document memo is on the level of the document, so it corresponds to the interview itself. So that particular document, Salim. And so you see, if I get this, I get a nice paragraph here of this interview. Salim was interviewed about his work-life balance and well-being. He described his typical workday, which starts at 5:30 a.m. and can last for 9 to 10 hours, often with unpredictable external appointments. He expressed dissatisfaction with the lack of time for his family and friends and the stress caused by his work schedule. He mentioned a desire for more flexible and predictable work hours, as well as the possibility of further education and a career change to a more office-based job. Salim rated his well-being as a 2 out of 5, citing the lack of balance and time for himself as the main reasons. He expressed a desire to have more time for physical exercise and a more predictable work schedule that allows for more time with his family. So obviously, this is not going to give you the kind of nuance that you're going to need to really glean anything particularly interesting, but it does give you a sense of what is the general tone and character of this interview, which could set you up to see more of those nuanced things as you get into the detailed text, right? If we look at the interview that was, or the summary that was generated by a real person, you'll see that we actually have a lot of things that are similar. Unsatisfied with work situation, long hours, doesn't get to see his children as much, unsatisfied with the unpredictability of external appointments. So we can see that our summarization is pretty good. A bullet point summary will look like this, right? So it's the same things here. It's just broken out line by line. So play around with this and see which version is best, but the highlights are going to be there across both. It's really just a preference for you as to which you prefer. Play around also with the length, shorter, standard, longer, to see which is best for you in terms of getting this integrated with your workflow. So this is the first place, right? When we're looking at summaries, again, we're thinking about our unit of analysis here. This is an entire document, an entire interview, right? So it's a whole summarization of a single document. The next place that we could start to work with summarizations is by using our coded segments. And so the difference, if we're thinking about units of analysis here, let's take a look at one of these. Let's look at our work-life balance. Let's look at friends and family. This is a good one. I've got 41 coded segments here. So to give you a sense of how this is spread out, let's right-click this, friends and family. Let's activate documents containing this code, and you'll see I have 11 documents containing this code. So probably all 10 of my interviews. Yep, all 10 of my interviews, and in my focus group. So you can see that this is spread out across 10 different people. It's spread out across 2 different locations, Berlin and Hamburg, and it's spread out across 2 different data types, interviews and focus groups. So the data I'm working with here is different. It's not a single interview. It's not a single person. It's 10 people. I think there's 5 in the focus group. So it's like 15 different people across 2 different styles of data collection. And so we have very different data that we're working with here. I don't have just one long document. I have 41 small pieces of data that have been collected across all of these different documents. And so if I were to go in here and do my summary, the easiest way to do this, I can right-click the code itself. In the AI Assist, it's going to give me the option to summarize coded segments. I can do it here if I want to right-click. I can also just open the memo directly, and then I can use the automatic summary with AI Assist option here. So I could do it in either location. You're going to get the same results. Again, what I get if I do this, I can change my length, shorter, standard, longer. I can go in text, in bullet points, or as a paragraph. Notice the option here for only activated documents. Again, I have the option to segment my data. So I could actually activate this code, and then I could activate just Salim's interview. And I could see what are how the coded segments for friends and family in Salim's interview. What's the summarization of that? What's the general trend there? So it is possible to segment even further. So be mindful of that. Your unit of analysis, again, there's not like a best way to do this. It's what you want to see, what you want to actually sort of investigate or analyze in your data. So set up your project or set up your parameters here accordingly. How many documents you want? Do you want the whole data set? Do you want just a specific subset? And so you see we get a basic overview here. Individuals interviewed here have varying levels of satisfaction with their work-life balance in relation to friends and family. Some struggle to find time for loved ones, while others prioritize family over friends. Okay, so you get an idea of how this is referenced across different people. In our data set, we'll have some people that are married, some people that are single, some people that have kids, some people that don't, some people that have higher education, some people that don't. And so we have a lot of variation in terms of how people would probably respond to these questions based off of their characteristics. So, but we get a nice overview of this that we can work with to maybe build up ideas for further analysis or further data collection, refining our interview questions, refining our survey questions, all that good stuff. Next piece here we've got is, let's see, coded segments. The next piece is in our summary grid. So if we were to open up our analysis tab and if we were to go to our summary grid, you'll see that I have these grouped, right? So anywhere you see a block, a blue block, this indicates that there is text, there's a coded segment, but there is no summary. Let's find one. Okay, this one has multiple. So you can see that here I have two coded segments. If I look in this matrix, I can see that this is Chris's interview, and this is the code for friends and family. So I'm able to group my data. So earlier when I said you could summarize based off of activated documents, this is essentially the same thing. It's just in a better visualized format, right? I'm doing the same thing, but rather than activating a document and selecting activated documents, I'm just seeing it in a table. This also then allows you to build out your summary tables where you can incorporate those nice joint displays where you can get variable values alongside any of your qualitative data, your researcher notes, your memos, all that good stuff. So this can be a nice piece, and you'll see right here, create an automatic summary with AI Assist, and we'll see the exact same options that we've seen in every other category. So again, the idea here, units of analysis, I'm gonna beat that one pretty hard through this webinar today. But the idea is, what do you want to see? What do you want to summarize? What do you want to work with in terms of data selection? So I think that takes us through most of the summarization tools in terms of where you can access them, units of analysis, depending on where you access them. Let's go ahead and take a look at, I saw someone raise their hand. If you want to type your question into the chat, I'm not quite sure how to unmute everybody. So if you want to type your question into the chat, that would be the best way to get it answered. Let's take a look here at the next piece, which is the paraphrase option. And so we see some paraphrases already in our text. These are user-generated paraphrases. But we can do the same thing with the AI Assist. Let's find one. Let's go to Ton here. He doesn't have many paraphrases done. So if I were to highlight this portion, let's leave out the letter there just to not confuse ChatGPT. If I were to highlight this, if I were to select a right click now and I get the AI Assist option. So we saw summarize. I guess I didn't actually mention this one in the summary, that the summarize here will create an in-document memo. So you saw that in the overview, but this will create, if I just go ahead and do this quick, let's do shorter. So this runs quickly. Let's see how fast my internet connection is today. This will vary depending on your internet connection speed, as well as the amount of data that you're sending out in terms of how long these summaries take. So I get this summary here. It gives me an idea of what I've got in this paragraph. So I've condensed this down to now, 3 sentences. If I close out of this, you'll see that the memo is attached right here. Okay. If I wanted to paraphrase this, however, I could use the same option. I could right click, I could paraphrase this text selection and use the AI Assist. The difference here is going to be the next step, right? So paraphrase is going to allow me to categorize paraphrases, whereas the summarize selection is just going to give me a memo, right? I could turn that memo into a document and do subsequent analysis on it as well. So it's not like you're, completely out of luck there, but this is going to be a little bit easier. You'll note that I get this AI notation as well, so I can recall that this was generated from the AI. If I come into my paraphrase options, this allows me again to categorize paraphrases, which you'll see looks a lot like the smart coding tool, right? And so now by right clicking in here, Oh, that's a media file. By right-clicking in here, I can create and assign new codes. I can also, I think, add some comments in this. No, I can't. I can include some variables, but you can't add comments to your paraphrases. But yeah, I could start to work with these paraphrases and then turn these into codes. And so again, this idea of just sort of a systematic process that I can use across all of my data so that I have nice comparable results. So this gives you a little bit more functionality in terms of the paraphrase functions. One thing you'll have to look at with paraphrase is, does this fit your approach? Not everybody uses the paraphrase tools. I think it's a great way, especially for new analysts, because it gives you flexibility. It doesn't have the confines of a specific code that you have to apply to the text. It's open-ended. You can use whatever vocabulary, whatever words you want. So even if you're not going to use it as the chief mode of analysis in your project, you can use it in the early stages as a way to familiarize yourself with the data, to help you in the process of creating codes. If you're doing collaborative analysis, these can be great discussion pieces when you debrief after a coding. So lots of good options there. And then again, you can roll that into categorized paraphrases. So you can always work that through in terms of the coding and sort of the coding process. Let's take a look at the suggest options. These ones I think are really cool. I think these are my favorite pieces, if I'm being honest. The suggest works in a couple different ways. If I were to go into, let's go back to Salim's interview. If I were to take this response here from Salim, let's say this third paragraph, and I highlight this, I can right click. Note the codes you see here. Friends and family, childcare, typical workday flexibility, family, friends and family. If I AI assist and I ask to suggest new codes for text selection, this is going to actually take the data, send it to ChatGPT. It's going to look for some patterns, sort of some consistent things, do a little bit of interpretation here, and it's going to suggest ways that we could code this data. Now, there are some limitations to this. We'll talk about in a second here once you see the suggestions that are available. But it is, I wouldn't say that this is a tool that you would use to just code everything in your data set. It's going to be very laborious, probably more so than just doing it yourself. But again, it's a good idea to get, it's a nice tool to get inspiration, to get some sort of, if you're working alone and you want a little bit of maybe feedback from ChatGPT. So this is broken down into thematic codes, some alternative thematic codes, and more interpretive codes, right? The thematic codes are going to be more rooted in the actual text, right? They're going to be related to more observable things that you can see, whereas the interpretive codes is going to be starting to draw some of that together, where you're actually sort of making a broader commentary on what you see. Now, if I wanted to apply one of these things, you'll see some of this is fairly similar, right? Friends and family, child care, so family responsibilities, and again, here is sort of that idea of the naming conventions that I think are nice, related to taking care of children and preparing meals. But I think family responsibilities maybe is a little bit of a broader term that you could capture more with than purely childcare, right? Because there's more that comes under that umbrella. So you may not necessarily use all of these specific codes, but you could grab some of them as inspiration for things that you could use later on. So let's assign one of these. Let's go ahead and put family responsibilities on here. And here's where you're going to see this is the limitation of this product or this feature. So family responsibilities, you see it codes the entire section of text. So it's not terribly granular, right? It doesn't give me the specific sentence or the 2 or 3 sentences that are direct references to this. So it really is here an assistant. It's not going to do this analysis completely for you because it's just not fine-tuned enough to get to the specific reference points. So, but it is a good inspiration tool. I think it's a nice inspiration tool. And you see that it does create the code here. And then that notation that it gave is also included. Mention of tasks related to taking care of children and preparing meals. So again, in terms of, this is why I rooted this in exploration. I don't think this is going to do full analysis for you, but it's going to help you in the early stages quite a bit. If I close out of this, the next feature in terms of the suggest is the suggest subcodes. The idea here is that I can do this in my code system like you saw in my concept map earlier. If I right click here, And then I go through AI Assist. I can get the idea to suggest subcodes. Now, what this will do is it will take, based off of these 24 coded segments, again, across multiple documents in my data set. If I were to right click this and I were to go AI Assist and I would go suggest subcodes, this will give me a list here. And again, you saw the option to only for activated documents. So you can segment this if you want to look at a particular subset of interviews, particular subset of survey responses. You can incorporate this with variable values if you're working with survey data to say all people over 52 in my data set said this. But the idea here is I now get some subcodes. So I get this idea, I could break out education into these subcategories. Pursuing further education while balancing work and family responsibilities. Challenges and trade-offs in balancing work, education, and personal life. Employer-provided training and professional development. Personal motivation for pursuing further education. And you'll see all that this will be stored here in your code memo. So you can use whatever you want in this. You don't have to integrate all of it. You can use pieces of it. The idea here is that I really do think it's a helpful way to define some of this stuff. You may be looking at this and say, man, I kind of feel like I know what's going on there. It's there, but it just hasn't quite formed yet. These tools can help you to get some sort of concrete, discrete language to use to actually begin to code some of these in other documents. And again, you can tweak these things. This is not a hard and fast. You can always use these. Now, you will have to go through the process of creating this code. So there's a manual step there that you copy and paste some stuff into making a new code and a new code memo. All right, and the last thing that we have to go through today, we've talked about suggesting codes, we're applying to limited selections. I talked about this earlier that some data is a little bit more useful for this. Survey data is one that's really useful for this. If I take a look here at my survey data, my open-ended questions, you'll see I have these grouped. Whenever you import survey data into MAXQDA, it's going to take whatever is in the column header, and it's going to attach that to the survey responses. So in order to use the summarized coded segments, the suggest subcodes, I have to have a code on the text to structure that, right? That's how I actually pull that data into the function. With survey data, it's nice because it automatically comes in. Now, that code that comes in is meaningless. It's just the question that was asked, right? You can see it here. Why would you spend more time on, you can see if I open the memo, it's this answers the survey question. Why would you like to spend more time? So there's nothing of meaning there. It's just a purely organizational piece. I can take all those survey responses and I can suggest subcodes, which will give me an idea of what's present in the data. I can get a summary, which will give me a nice paragraph or some bullet points about what's present in the data. And so really, it's just a way to familiarize yourself with what you're seeing. Now, again, if you've collected this data yourself, you probably already have a good idea of this. If you're working with data that people give you, though, this is a huge advantage. It's something I use a lot in the work that I do. But it can also just, again, give you that kind of inspiration piece to help you get going, give you some different ways to sort of start to process this data. All right, the last piece here that we have is the explain function, the new feature. You can use this in a lot of different places. You can use this sort of in academic context if you're looking for a specific language, maybe based around some type of theory or model. You can also use it in things like concepts that people might mention. So for example, typical workday is mentioned here. And if I highlight this, just these two words. Now, the explain needs to be shorter pieces of text. This is not explain a whole document to me. This is explain a concept or a phrase. So if I highlight typical workday, I right-click AI Assist and I ask it to explain this text selection. It's going to ask, it's going to create an in-document memo like we saw with the summarized text selections. You're going to get an in-document memo for this. But what it'll do is it'll give you sort of an explanation of what a typical workday is. Now, that's probably not terribly useful, but sometimes when we are coding, it's really helpful to have these detailed explanations of these concepts, especially if we're doing collaborative work where we have multiple people trying to code things. we want to be on the same page. So you get a typical workday refers to the standard routine and activities that an individual engages in during their regular work hours. This may include arriving at the workplace, blah, blah, blah. So some limitations here. When you're working with sort of more difficult concepts or terminology, or when you're working with things that maybe there is not exactly an agreement on in academics, this might be limited. So don't take this as gospel. There may be some revisions or some caveats that you may need to add into this in order to make it sort of functional for you or applicable. So it's a cool tool, and I think I can see usage in this in terms of making a code memo. If I asked people to code for typical workday, so let's say I'm the PI on a project and I'm handing this off to some research analysts, I could include something like this so that they know the precise definition that I want for a typical workday. Now I might need to go in and tweak some of this to make it fit for my particular context, but again, it can give you some inspiration. It can kind of get you started. So it's an assistant. It's not going to do everything for you. All right, I think that takes us through all of the features that I wanted to show today, the overview, the demonstration of things. You go through my outline here. So summarize, we looked at all these, paraphrase, suggest, and explain. We're going to take time for questions. I did want to throw this out here too. Again, here's my contact information, my email, joel.drevlow@iqdas.com. You can find my website here as well, or if you'd like to send a request on LinkedIn, we can definitely hook up there as well. I do individual consultations, organization consultations. I work with universities, NGOs, all kinds of different groups. So be happy to collaborate with you, whether it's for a whole project or a half an hour, we can definitely work that out. So feel free to shoot me an email if you have some questions. If you've got some data you'd like a partner to work through, we can definitely do that too. So I'd love to hear from you folks.